What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review The Smashing Machine, which I saw last night in IMAX 70mm up at the AMC Lincoln Square. And I'll go spoiler-free initially, but spoilers are a little tricky when you're dealing with a true story and you have a feature film based on a documentary from 2002 capturing the events of the late 90s. But the first half of my video will be for people who don't follow MMA and are unfamiliar with the story of Mark Kerr. And the second half of my video will be for MMA fans. In any case, the short version of my review is The Rock pulled it off, and more importantly, writer-director Benny Safdie pulled it off. And going into this movie, I basically had two big questions in my mind. Could The Rock explore the darkness at the core of this story, because it deals with substance abuse and defeat and all sorts of horrible trials and tribulations that Mark Kerr faced in the late 90s. But I also wondered, could Benny Safdie direct a really powerful movie in the absence of his brother Josh Safdie? Because previously, when they were making movies like Good Time and Uncut Gems, they were always working as a team. But this year, the Safdie brothers, they both have described it as like the natural evolution of their careers, so they're going in different directions. But Benny Safdie, he nailed it. I mean, first and foremost, the 16mm looks great blown up to IMAX 70mm. I kind of wondered, why would you shoot the movie in 16mm only to blow it up to IMAX 70mm? But if you like a little bit of grain in your movies and you like that kind of pseudo-documentary flavor, well then definitely check out The Smashing Machine on the biggest screen that you can possibly find. And I think the reason the pseudo-documentary flavor works is because he's doing actually a really good job of recreating the best scenes from the documentary, The Smashing Machine, The Life and Times of Extreme Fighter, Mark Kerr from 2002, which I first saw years ago and actually did a podcast about it back on Wrong Reel 184, which I'll link down in the description below. But for fans of mixed martial arts, sadly, there's a very short list of good movies about the sport. But that original documentary is one of them, but now we can add Benny Safdie's film to the list as well. But there's another reason for concern, because there's a very poor track record out there of narrative movies being made from really cool documentaries. Like in the past, there was that really great documentary, Man on Wire, about the guy who did the tightrope walk between the World Trade Center, and it got turned into the wretched movie, The Walk, by Robert Zemeckis, one of the worst movies I've ever seen. But the documentary is great. Or a more recent example would be the documentary WeWork, or the making and breaking of a $47 billion unicorn. They turned that into the absolutely wretched movie We Cash with Jared Leto. And so anytime I see somebody turning a really good documentary into a movie, I'm always immediately suspicious and like my guard's up, and I'm wondering, all right, to what degree are you going to fuck this up? But Benny Safdie, very wisely, he just looked at the best scenes from the documentary. He's like, you know what? I'm just going to recreate them with the assistance of The Rock and Emily Blunt, as well as a lot of real-life MMA athletes. Like, the craziest thing about this movie is seeing Bas Rutten playing himself, recreating scenes that he was already in the original documentary. And Bas Rutten, luckily, he's aged very well. So he looks almost identical now in 2025 to how he did in 2002, apart from some wisdom lines and that sort of thing. But it almost makes you wonder, like, well, why are you making the movie if you're just going to do like a shot-for-shot recreation? But I think the answer to that is that Benny Safdie wanted to showcase the acting talent, the chops of Dwayne Johnson in a way that had never been seen before, the same way the Safdie brothers did with Adam Sandler with Uncut Gems, where people who had only seen Happy Gilmore were suddenly like, whoa, he can act. Like, not a lot of people saw Punch Drunk Love, so I think it kind of surprised people when Adam Sandler was just blowing people away in Uncut Gems. And people are going to be blown away by The Rock and The Smashing Machine. I'd say it took about 3 minutes before I stopped thinking of him as The Rock and started thinking about him as Mark Kerr. And he just disappears into the role, and it's just uncanny.
What are you thinking at the beginning of the fight?
It's simple. Am I going to hurt him before he hurts me?
Which almost makes you wonder, like, well, Dwayne, why have you been wasting your time all these years making all these, like, stupid Disney adventure movies and that sort of thing when you got this actor kind of tucked away inside? And I hope that for the rest of his career, because obviously at this point, The Rock's made a gazillion dollars making all those action movies. I hope The Rock will steer toward or lean into more character-driven work, because he's been kind of holding out on us. He's been hiding his true gifts and his true talent as a performer. And obviously it helps when you're dealing with the world or the sport of mixed martial arts, which is very adjacent to the world of professional wrestling from which he comes. And it also helps that this movie gives The Rock a pretty interesting creative challenge, because the material being explored at times, it's very dark, it's very depressing. You're dealing with substance abuse and violence and injuries and pain and relationship problems. And it almost feels like this story was tailor-made to show off what Dwayne Johnson can bring to the table. And for people who are unfamiliar with the world of mixed martial arts in the late 90s, I think the movie does a pretty good job of easing people into it without overwhelming them with too many facts or too much information about the sport at that time. But even younger fans of MMA today might not appreciate just how different the sport was in the late 90s, where they were basically inventing the rules and inventing like the techniques in real time, and the sport was evolving and changing very quickly. But at that time, you had UFC, and I'm wearing my UFC 268 shirt. I went to that event at MSG here in New York. And you had Pride over in Japan. And at that time, Pride was insanely popular. I mean, you were talking about like 90,000 people showing up, and they had all this like spectacle and pomp and circumstance. And they really had like almost like a ritualistic aspect to it. But Japanese MMA fans are very different from American MMA fans, where they're very quiet when they watch, and just the pageantry is totally different. And this movie is much more concerned with the era of Pride. And I would have worn my Pride shirt, but my Pride shirt at this point has so many pit stains, and it's so gross, I couldn't bear to wear it on camera. But for people who are fascinated with Japanese culture, in particular when it comes to combat sports, they're going to absolutely love the window that this movie provides into Japanese combat sports in the late 90s. But another interesting aspect to this movie is that it's got a bit of an everyman quality to it. And I shouldn't say everyman, because early in his career, Mark Kerr was a total world beater. I mean, he was a destroyer when he first got started, and you can look at his record, and you can see the first half of his career where he was just eating people alive, picking them up, smashing them, and either with headbutts or knees or elbows, finishing people off very, very quickly. And then the second half of his career, sadly, gets a little bit more depressing. But he's really, really good, but he's not one of like the faces of the sport. He's not like Chuck Liddell from the early 2000s, or he's not Anderson Silva from a slightly later era, or he's not Ronda Rousey or Conor McGregor or John Jones or any of the major superstars who have emerged over the years. A lot of MMA fans don't even know who Mark Kerr was, because in the late 90s, sometimes it was hard to even find the UFC in America, because there were a lot of politicians who were trying to ban the sport at the time. It was hard to put on events, and it was hard to find the pay-per-views, and oftentimes you could only watch it by buying these little crummy little VHS cassettes or later on DVDs. But speaking of Pride, which was thriving at that time, maybe about 10 or 15 years ago, I bought a giant stack of DVDs that collected like the first 10 or 11 Pride events. And they were so much goddamn fun to watch. Once again, the pageantry, the music, the spectacle, just like the way they staged the events and all the legends that were competing at that time. It was just such a fascinating period in the sport. And Mark Kerr was a huge part of it, but this movie makes the interesting creative decision to basically leapfrog over all the good times in Mark Kerr's career. Like they make you aware of the good times, but we basically pick up in the story right as the wheels are about to fly off the cart, where Mark Kerr's partying too much, he's drinking too much, he's definitely taking way too many opiates for pain, and he's dating someone by the name of Dawn Staples, played by Emily Blunt, where she likes boozing it up and doing some drugs as well. And as his career is starting to go down due to substance abuse, she's like, well, why do I have to stop partying just because you've decided to stop partying? And at the same time, Mark Kerr's best friend, Mark Coleman, who's an absolute legend of the sport and an absolute legend in real life. Mark Coleman quite literally saved his parents from a burning building. I mean, he nearly died in the process. But at this time, right as Mark Kerr's career was starting to go down, Mark Coleman's career he was entering a new high in his career, where he'd enjoyed earlier success in the UFC, but he was really starting to thrive in Pride. And in a great creative decision, they decided to bring in Ryan Bader to play Mark Coleman, because Mark Coleman's too old to play the part at this point. And to be fair, Dwayne Johnson's too old to be playing Mark Kerr in any case. But Ryan Bader, he had an awesome career in the UFC after appearing in the reality show The Ultimate Fighter. And I remember following him on The Ultimate Fighter and thinking, oh, he's pretty goddamn good. And I saw him in the flesh at UFC 100 back in 2009 in Vegas, just walking around the Mandalay Bay. But he had a great UFC career, and then he went off to Bellator, where he had a great career as well. But what I did not know is that Ryan Bader can act.
What happened?
I'm so sorry.
It's me. You don't have to apologize, okay?
And it's not like he's reading like Shakespearean soliloquies or anything like that, but he's got some very, he's got a very calm, naturalistic acting style where he just reads the lines without any real affectation and just lets the drama speak for itself. And Ryan Bader and Dwayne Johnson, like when you're watching it, you forget, oh, this guy started out as a professional wrestler, and this guy started out as a mixed martial arts superstar. But they're creating these incredibly moving, powerful scenes. And that was probably the biggest surprise in this movie, is that Ryan Bader, he can fucking act. And I knew that Bas Rutten would be fine, because Bas Rutten, in addition to being a legendary MMA practitioner, as well as a great coach and a great commentator, and he's done talk shows and that sort of thing. But Bas Rutten is one of the world's great personalities in the world of combat sports. He's fucking hilarious. He's awesome. He's one of those larger-than-life personalities up there with like Renzo Gracie and people like that. So Bas Rutten, while it was a delight to see him performing so well in the movie, it didn't come as a huge shocker to me that he could just knock it out of the park. But for fans of mixed martial arts or boxing or wrestling or any combat sport you care to mention, you're going to have a lot of fun trying to pick out which legends are in the movie playing themselves and which legends are playing other people, like Alexander Usyk. He's playing the legendary Igor Vovchanchyn, if I'm saying his last name correctly, who's a big figure in Pride back in the late 90s. But then you have a lot of other people in there, like Steven Quadros, just playing himself. He's gotten a little older since the late 90s, but they just brought him and said, look, just play yourself and just do what you do. But the big question is, will this movie have appeal to people who are not interested in mixed martial arts or people who are outright disgusted by mixed martial arts? And there are a lot of people out there who want nothing to do with the sport. They don't like watching it. They don't like hearing about it. And I get it. It's a very extreme sport. You have basically two men in their underwear beating the fuck out of each other for everybody's entertainment. It's an extreme sport. It's an extreme spectacle. But what I'm about to say might be a little controversial, but I think the movie actually might have more appeal to people who are unfamiliar with the sport than those who are familiar with the sport. Because if you love MMA and you're expecting to see Mark Kerr, the Destroyer, just ripping people to pieces, maybe the one flaw in this movie is that the MMA on display is actually not that good. And that's ironic in that you have real MMA or wrestling athletes participating in the movie, but the movie's not trying to give you thrills and chills from the spectacle and the violence. It's the human drama going on around it. So it's almost like the combat in the movie is a bit of an afterthought. So I was unimpressed by like the sports side of it, but I was much more impressed by the human drama. And I think the human drama is what's going to give this movie broader appeal. So don't be surprised if you see a lot of MMA fans saying, man, that movie is fucking garbage. The fight scenes sucked. But it's like, well, if you want to see the fight scenes, just go online and watch the original fight scenes. They're awesome. They hold up really, really well. And Pride back in that era, I mean, like soccer kicks to the face of downed opponents and that sort of thing. It's insane. But for people who are totally disgusted by the sport of mixed martial arts, there's a great early scene where Dwayne Johnson as Mark Kerr basically explains like the rules and where it comes from and the different martial arts disciplines that are involved, and how in the early days of MMA, it was a unique opportunity to see like what would happen if a Greco-Roman wrestler went up against like a Muay Thai fighter? What would happen if a jiu-jitsu fighter went up against a karate guy? And then over time, as people started to realize, well, it sucks to have like a glaring weakness and one great strength. Why don't I study a little bit of all of it, which is how it became mixed martial arts. But I think the movie might actually serve as a good kind of doorway or entry point for some people to take an interest in mixed martial arts. And of course, they're going to watch like a UFC pay-per-view now and be like, this is quite different from the late 90s. And yeah, the late 90s, once again, it was the Wild Wild West when it came to the sport, when all the techniques and all the approaches to the sport when it comes to nutrition and training, they were debates like laying down the track in front of the train as well as moving at high speed. But as a fan of the sport, it was fascinating in the early days watching the sport evolving so quickly right before our eyes. But getting back to the Smashing Machine, the big question is, will this movie be a success for A24? And I commend A24 for taking on this movie. And I've seen reported budgets anywhere from $40 million on the low end to $70 million on the high end. That's a huge risk for a smaller company like A24. They make the occasional, big financial gamble on a movie that may or may not kind of pay off, but they're much more comfortable down in like the 5 to 10 million range. This is a huge project for A24. But obviously, The Rock he's got his fair share of box office clunkers and his box office runaway successes. What kind of movie will this be like for the people who want to see The Rock kind of more typical action-driven spectacles? Will they show up in the same numbers to support this movie? Because there's a very good chance that there are going to be a lot of award shows that decide to give him an acting nomination. And depending upon how good Leo is in one battle after another, or how good Timothée Chalamet is in Marty Supreme, he very well might win, just because it's so unusual seeing an actor who's known for just being a big, giant, hulking personality, revealing so many qualities that have basically been hidden up until now. But long story short, while it remains to be seen if the Smashing Machine will be a hit or an awards contender or whatever the case may be, I definitely think it's one of the best movies of the year, and it's definitely the best drama I've seen set in the world of MMA. And admittedly, the list of great MMA movies is very short. There's documentaries like Choke, there's documentaries like the original Smashing Machine, and of course there's Warrior from 2011 starring Tom Hardy and Joel Edgerton, which up until now is probably the best movie about the world of MMA. And there are a few others like Red Belt. Red Belt has its moments, but it also has quite a few flaws. But I'm just going to go ahead and say it. As of now, in 2025, the best movie about the sport of mixed martial arts, or the UFC, or Pride, is definitely The Smashing Machine. But before I wrap up this video, I want to share a few words and a few spoilers for people who are either familiar with the sport of mixed martial arts or who have seen the original documentary. But bail out now if you want to go into this movie totally cold. All right, so let's just start with the fact that I'm loving having the excuse to discuss some MMA on this channel, because years ago I was debating Should this channel just be devoted to movies exclusively, or should I also talk about video games or MMA or novels or comic books or basically anything in the world of entertainment that grabs my interest? And while I will dip into the world of books here and there or video games here and there, primarily this channel is devoted to movies and film history, an area where I have much more expertise. I have a teeny tiny bit of expertise when it comes to the world of martial arts, just from like dabbling with like karate in college and a little bit of capoeira out in LA when I lived out there, and a little bit of Brazilian jiu-jitsu while in business school, and a little Muay Thai while here. But I was always basically like a beginner in all those art forms. And I've always been just a little bit intimidated by the prospect of discussing MMA when I lack the technical expertise to go into it in greater detail. So I've just decided, you know what, I'm going to be an MMA fan. It'll be my escape from work, and I won't worry about trying to do regular MMA commentary. However, when one of the most exciting young filmmakers out there, Benny Safdie, decides to make a movie about the world of MMA, well, then it's game on, and it's time to discuss some MMA. But as I said in the earlier section of this video, I think diehard MMA fans are going to be a little disappointed by the action in the movie, even if they're blown away by the drama of the movie. And it should come as no surprise to anybody that Benny Safdie would be good at this kind of material, because he already tackled drug addiction and basically a variety of forms of addiction in earlier movies. Like in Uncut Gems, Adam Sandler's character is addicted to gambling. He's obsessed. But in the 2014 movie Heaven Knows What, Benny and Josh Safdie made a movie about heroin addiction, and it's based on a memoir by the girl who was acting in the movie. I don't think Heaven Knows What is that entertaining of a movie, but if you just want to see a sad, depressing, kind of demoralizing movie about the realities of substance abuse, check out Heaven Knows What. What I like about the Smashing Machine is that we get all the trials and tribulations and the dangers of shooting up heroin in order to kill the pain, but it's not like the sole focus on the movie. There's a lot of adversarial confrontations with Emily Blunt's character, and there's like the challenges of dealing with like the language barriers over in Japan. And I think some of the best scenes of the movie are the scenes where we get to see just how confusing it was for an American athlete without a translator trying to compete in Japan at a time where the rules are constantly changing. And a lot of the things, or a lot of the techniques that Mark Kerr relies upon, are suddenly getting banned, like headbutts or kneeing a downed opponent. Like some things are obvious, like you can't eye gouge, you can't bite, like all that crap disappeared pretty early on. I can't even remember a single MMA fight from UFC 1 onward where anybody ever bit anyone. I think it was always illegal, as was eye gouging. The movie tries to almost like act like suddenly that's a new rule in the late 90s, but if memory serves, in UFC 1, those were the only things that were banned, eye gouging and biting and that sort of thing. And then slowly but surely, other techniques started to be banned as well. But one of the best scenes of the movie by far is when we get to see Mark Kerr suffer his first loss, which becomes a no contest due to Igor Vovchanchyn throwing illegal knees to a downed opponent. And he's just like, he's been told you're not allowed to do this, but he's just throwing one knee after another to the top of Mark Kerr's head while he's kind of shelling up. And Mark Kerr keeps waiting for the ref to step in and intervene, and suddenly he's told that he's lost. And up to this time, he'd just been such a dominant athlete and just destroying guys. At this point, he had 11 straight wins leading up to that. And seeing, like, The Rock does such a great job of capturing, like, the emotional highs of victory and people are cheering your name, to just the heartbreaking, crushing emotions of when you finally suffer defeat, and just how overwhelming it can be, especially when you are trying to explain how you got screwed over by somebody breaking the rules and everybody's pretending like they can't understand what you're talking about. In any case, that all took place at Pride 7, but I feel like that's where the movie really starts to get good. But the really meaty scenes are the darkest and most depressing scenes from the documentary. And I suspect those scenes are what drew Benny Safdie to the project, where we see Mark Kerr, because he lost or got the no contest, getting more and more depressed, and he's dealing with injuries and pain, and he just starts shooting up all the time, and he can't wake up, and he's lethargic, and he can't get off the couch. My only experience with opiates from when I had a kidney stone earlier this summer, and I got 2 shots of morphine. I was like, whoa, I get it. This stuff makes you feel like you're riding a magic carpet. And Mark Kerr, as he's dealing with this defeat/no contest, as well as his injuries, he just starts shooting up more and more. And his relationship with Dawn Staples is complex, because on one hand, she wants him to remain a world beater and continue bringing in the income and kicking everybody's ass, but she also likes to drink and do drugs and party and have people over and that sort of thing. And so she's not necessarily the world's greatest ally when it comes to trying to sober up and get on the road to recovery. As it turns out, Ryan Bader, or not, Mark Coleman, is a much better ally on that front. And as Mark Kerr finally does get sober and he's trying to stay focused, and it's all leading up to the I think it's the Pride 2000 Grand Prix. Hang on, let me just check. Yeah, the Pride Grand Prix 2000. After Mark Kerr beats Ensign Inoue in the Grand Prix opening round in January, he gets a chance to return in May for the Grand Prix 2000 finals. And it's just heartbreaking watching this movie recreate all the dramatic beats from the documentary and showcasing all the poor decisions that were made that led up to Mark Kerr's inevitable defeat at the hands of Kazuyuki Fujita at the Pride Grand Prix 2000 finals. And the movie does a great job of showing just how vital it is to remain focused and distraction-free when leading up to a big fight, because we see Mark Coleman training, or Ryan Bader training, and he's wrestling and doing all these drills and kicking all kinds of butt and getting healthy and getting strong and getting focused. Meanwhile, Mark Kerr, we're seeing him sip a beer here and there. And the big warning sign is when he tells Bas Rutten that he's basically going to go home for a week before heading off to Japan. And Bas Rutten's like, "Are you sure that's a good idea? Don't you want to stay here and do a little more drills? Like who's going to train with you during that time?" And Mark Kerr kind of gives him these kind of evasive, non-committal answers, because you know he's going to go home and start partying with Dawn again, while at the same time resenting her for tempting him with this partying lifestyle. And yeah, she's not entirely grounded in her own lifestyle. I mean, she's always like, smashing gifts that he's brought her from Japan, or threatening to blow her brains out with a gun. I mean, it's just total chaos. And all these horrific arguments over to what degree she should be involved in his life when he's training for a big fight, whether or not she should come to Japan at all. Once again, if you're training for a big fight, it helps if you're not living with somebody who's constantly threatening to blow their brains out because you don't want them to accompany you on your big trip to Japan. But as I said earlier in the video, the big surprise with this movie is just how good an actor Ryan Bader is, especially when he's recreating the joy that Mark Coleman expressed when he finally won the Pride Grand Prix 2000, when he runs over to the side of the ring and kind of leaps sideways into the air and then kind of bounces back down. They created the moment beat for beat, and it's fantastic. So I think people who love the good old days of Pride from the late 90s and early 2000s, they're going to have a blast with this. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if a lot of MMA fans have the same complaint about this movie that I do, where they'll say it's a great movie about MMA and the lifestyle of an athlete, but it's not a great movie for showcasing the techniques that we all love and enjoy while watching the sport. The action, I would say, is unremarkable, or not necessarily that memorable. What's memorable is the training, the drug abuse, the fights, the lifestyle, just getting into the head of the athlete. That stuff's all handled incredibly well. So I can forgive a lack of great action, because pretty much every weekend these days you get to watch great MMA. And because these days pretty much every fighter out there either has their own YouTube channel or their own podcast devoted to commentary in addition to competing, I'll be curious to see how all the superstars today react to the movie. But more importantly, how will the commentators as well as the athletes who are participating in the late 90s, how will they respond? Like, how will Mark Coleman react to seeing Ryan Bader portray him on the big screen? It's going to be interesting seeing the responses start to roll in over the next couple weeks. But I'm just going to go ahead and commit to saying this is the best narrative movie made about MMA yet. And hopefully it'll open the door to a lot more cool movies about MMA in the future. We've had a ton of great movies about the world of boxing. We've had, I guess, a few about wrestling, but it's time to get some good movies about MMA. The big question is, what will Benny Safdie do next, and what will Dwayne Johnson do next? And it's interesting seeing how both Benny Safdie and Josh Safdie, when they separated, they both decided to make sports movies. One about ping pong, one about MMA. And I guess in addition to being just giant movie freaks, they must be giant sports freaks as well. But with Dwayne Johnson, I hope it's a real turning point, because he's in his 50s now, and I know he's been slimming down. I think a lot of people will feel after they see this movie that The Rock's been kind of holding out on us or concealing his most interesting qualities as a performer up until now. And so who knows, maybe in his 50s, 60s, and 70s, his career will be more dominated by character-driven work as opposed to action and spectacle and, Fast and Furious movies and all that kind of stuff. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Will this movie be a box office success? Will it be an awards contender? And will it represent a giant turning point in the careers of Benny Safdie and Dwayne Johnson? We'll just have to wait and see. But I can't thank you enough for watching this video and listening to my lengthy rambling rant. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, and hopefully I won't have to wait too long to have yet another excuse to discuss MMA on this channel. But thanks again for watching, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.